Good afternoon. Delighted to see such a good turnout. My name is Ian Wardropper. I'm the director of the Frick Collection, though formerly chairman of European Sculpture and Decorative Arts here at the Met. But I'm actually here today because of my role as a guest curator for the exhibition Bernini Sculpting in Clay, which is here until January 6th. I had the good fortune of working on this exhibition with C.D. Dickerson, who is curator of European art at the Kimbell Art Museum, which is where the exhibition travels next for its only other venue, and with Anthony Siegel, who is conservator of objects and sculpture at the Strauss Center for Conservation and Technical Studies at Harvard, who will be speaking to us later this afternoon. This is the first exhibition to attempt to bring together all of the preparatory studies in terracotta and associated drawings by Gian Lorenzo Bernini. Bernini was born in Naples in 1598 and died in Rome in 1680. He had a long professional career, was a child prodigy, and we begin the exhibition with an early marble that happens to be in the Met's collection to remind our audience that this is what galvanized attention in Rome when he burst onto the scene in his early years. But in this exhibition, we have pulled together the preparatory studies that was necessary to make these. And it's been a difficult task for a number of reasons. One is his long professional working life. The other is the enormous impact that he had on the city of Rome. Paolo D'Agostino, who's a senior research associate at the Metropolitan Museum and was a key figure in bringing the exhibition here, has conceived a video that's in the exhibition based on contemporary maps and engravings that help to visualize the extent of Bernini's impact on the city of Rome by showing the enormous projects that he did across that city. And of course, with such enormous projects, he had to have a huge workshop. As Jennifer Montague said once in a phrase which I will mangle, almost everyone in Rome who could hold a chisel worked for Bernini at some point or another. So that there are many other candidates to have done the terracottas, and what we've tried to do here is make attributions for them to Bernini or to his workshop or to others, and equally important to show how these models functioned in sculptural practice. We have tried in this instance to marry the technical studies, which, as you'll see in Tony Siegel's presentation, were absolutely essential to the exhibition, with the more art historical and connoisseurship approaches from which he's been looked at in the past. And so this exhibition is the result of that. Today we have three lecturers who will be speaking on different facets of Bernini's production, and some of the most imposing models in the exhibition were made for the Piazza Navona. So I'm very pleased that Tod Marder is going to be the first lecturer today. He took his PhD at Columbia in 1976 and has been at the Rutgers Department of Art History since 1975. He comes to his subject from the vantage point of that of an architectural historian. His book, Bernini's Scala Regia at the Vatican Palace, Architecture, Sculpture, and Ritual of 1997, or his book, Bernini and the Art of Architecture, 1998, which won the Dario Borghese Prize, show his deep commitment to the architectural studies of Bernini, except it's impossible to study architecture in total isolation when it comes to Bernini. So Professor Marder has worked on drawings, on paintings, and of course on sculpture through the course of his long career. He has won numerous awards to pursue this, and we're delighted that he's going to start off our program today. Professor Marder.
Ian, thank you very much for that generous introduction. It's a privilege to speak today on the occasion of a show that so fundamentally expands our understanding of Bernini, the artist, and the medium of clay, and which brings us very close to the nature and beauty of the creative process. I can't but begin with deepest thanks to C.D. Dickerson, to Tony Siegel, and to Ian for what they have achieved for all of us in the public and shared with colleagues like myself. In the following 25 minutes or so, I would like to discuss how the exhibition and catalog contributes to a better understanding of the fountains that Bernini designed at Piazza Navona. I began studying this topic in the 1990s, left it, and again took it up over the last 3 years in collaboration with Dr. Maria Grazia D'Amelio, a professor at the University of Rome and an expert in 17th century engineering. She is my unseen collaborator here, and what we've published so far is enormously enriched by the discoveries of the exhibition. The fountain section of the catalog begins with the claim Bernini made for himself as un amico dell'acqua, friend of water. He truly was, and the best evidence for it is located in the heart of old Rome on Piazza Navona. His masterpiece here is the Fountain of the Four Rivers, planned and built from 1646 to 51. In the center of the fountain, in the center of the piazza here, and see it in the distance there. It is complemented by what has been dubbed the Moor Fountain, here just to the south, finished in 1655, for which we have one of Bernini's greatest models. Although Bernini was also meant to do a fountain on the north, it never happened, and a 19th century composition is located there now. Piazza Navona is a public space built over the foundations of an ancient Roman stadium. The Pamphili family had long owned property on the southwest border of the space, and I'm pointing that property out with these arrows, when one of their number became Pope Innocent X in 1644. At this time, Innocent's modest childhood residence was enlarged to monumental scale. The local church of Sant'Agnese here was rebuilt, and the architect Francesco Borromini, Bernini's great rival, brought additional water to the piazza in preparation for a new central fountain. Bernini, a favorite of the previous Pope Urban VIII Barberini, was an unlikely candidate for the commission from Urban's political foe and successor. The artist had recently suffered public disgrace when his South Tower at St. Peter's was dismantled by the order of Innocent X due to accusations that it was causing cracks in the fabric below it. Here's the tower. The cracks are still visible, but Bernini's responsibility for them has been debated ever since. According to contemporary sources, however, Bernini took to his bed in depression, roused from it only by the opportunity presented at Piazza Navona. In 3 sketches by the sculptor Alessandro Algardi and a drawing by Borromini, in those 3 sketches, Bernini's own designs were preceded. His was never officially requested. It came almost literally through the back door. Algardi's was done even before the Pope ordered an obelisk brought to the site from the ancient stadium of Maxentius. Borromini's design is less sculpturally oriented and a more traditional way of supporting an ancient obelisk re-erected to the glory of the early modern popes. Under Pamphili auspices, Piazza Navona would once again become a kind of imperial stadium. Sources tell us that the Pope was led unexpectedly to discover a strategically placed model of Bernini's scheme, whereupon Innocent declared that one simply cannot see a Bernini design without wishing immediately to execute it. That model was done in silver, according to one account, which only enhanced its appeal for the Pope's influential sister-in-law, the avaricious Olympia Maidalchini. By this time, the program also included references to the 4 rivers of the world, symbolizing the 4 continents, all of which information was secretly passed to Bernini on the order of Olympia by the papal bursar Virgilio Spada. The story of this intrigue deserves its own lecture, and we'll just suffice it to say at this point that Bernini triumphed in his time of adversity and created a masterpiece. His approach was to support the obelisk on a tall, elaborately carved base, a mass of stone quarried and worked on the site to look primevally natural, with uneven surfaces made to look as though they had been yanked abruptly from the earth. The personifications include the Danube for Europe, here, the Ganges of representing Asia, here and here, the Nile representing Africa, here and here, and the Rio de la Plata, representing the New World. These figures were carved in marble by Bernini's assistants Antonio Raggi, Claude Poussin, relative of the painter, Giacomo Antonio Fancelli, and Francesco Baratta. The papal escutcheons, the papal coats of arms, see them here and here, were by Niccolo Sale. The personifications sit on travertine blocks, which form a sort of 4-legged support made of travertine with openings cut through the north and south axes. The travertine was assembled and carved by Giovanni Maria Fracchi, who, like most of the other assistants, is not frequently discussed. The obelisk was brought from the Via Appia in ruined pieces, repaired, and then re-erected on the new site. The faceted rock base, which represents the terrestrial realm, contrasts with the piercing regularity of the ancient obelisk, which symbolizes the divine realm, an ancient symbol topped by the Pamphili dove with an olive branch in its beak. The extensive use of assistants made it essential for Bernini to control the enterprise carefully. This he seems to have done through models, as we see with reference to the wonderful lion, which is on the cover of the exhibition catalog. Oops, I'm sorry. The lion is here, east-facing. The X-radiograph in the catalog shows that the torso of the clay lion was elongated, no doubt to visibly span the northeast pillar. That is to say, this pillar here, so that the head pokes out from one side and the tail from the other. The curators also point out that faintly visible lines on the clay, and I've drawn arrows to them, very difficult to see, but they're there, are precisely related to the joints in the travertine that compose the lion. There's a joint there in the stone and a joint there. In other words, what the organizers have told us is that Bernini was careful to communicate to his workers exactly how the lion would be shaped, but also how it would be constructed. This observation represents the identification of a new function for clay models, and it appears quite frequently in Bernini's work. It also helps Maria Grazia and me to better understand the construction of the whole fountain. As the drawing from Leipzig, As the drawing from Leipzig shows, Bernini starts with the idea of a corbelled arch in 3 dimensions, that is to say, an arch based on progressively overlapping stones. In order that the stability of these masses allow the artist freely to carve shapes on the outer crust to appear tilted and deeply fractured, as you see in the composition of the drawing, and you see on this structural diagram, which also shows you the layers of travertine. The forms destabilize the appearance of the base, evoking a lifting and the lifting and sliding fault lines of the earth, which seem on the verge of collapse. Bernini introduces an astonishing deconstructive implication. He visually disrupts the equilibrium exactly where it seems most crucial, that is to say, right under the obelisk. Research on the Rio della Plata model from the Franchetti collection offers another surprise. Oh, this will show you what I'm talking about when I speak of a surprising deconstruction, all made possible by horizontal layers of travertine. Research on the Rio della Plata model from the Franchetti collection offers another surprise in the exhibit, demonstrating that it is both autograph and preparatory and not a copy after the fact. I just note here that the coins that represent the richness, the wealth of the River of Silver, as it was called. There's cactus here representing the New World and so forth. This was a location that was a target of missionary efforts from the from the late 16th century onward. What impresses me is everywhere Bernini works on a single figure, he tries to integrate it into the rocky setting. And in fact, it seems to me that this was a major challenge in this sort of marble and travertine mixed media production. That is what brings us to the wooden model from Bologna, where the Rio della Plata makes a second appearance. Again, the curators prove beyond any doubt that the piece is preparatory to the fountain and constructed under Bernini's supervision. Holes drilled in the wood under the clay figures, and I'm referring to a photograph kindly provided me by Tony Siegel, enabled the artist to adjust the size of these figures and their disposition, to interchange them at will. Similarly, two holes at the top of the wooden model, again Tony's image, suggests their use to attach a model obelisk that's now lost. It's right up here, or would have been right up there. This would have allowed Bernini and his patrons to test the appearance and adjust the size of the pedestal if it were called for. Indeed, this was a crucial issue. All parties knew that the Pamphili obelisk from the Circus of Maxentius was a relatively short one and fragmented in bits. The fact is highlighted in a drawing from the Vatican Library that we have analyzed in our writing recently. The drawing, which is a piece of planning in process, shows the spire raised to different heights, depending on how many of its broken pieces were going to be employed and how tall the pedestal would be. And I've tried to show you the heights that are pretty much impossible to see in my reproduction. This is one version. That, I'm sure you can see, is just one more. There are two others sort of hidden by the light graphite. The wooden model would have allowed this experimentation to continue in 3 dimensions. Moreover, to aid in literally raising the profile of the fountain, we discovered that Bernini had gently rounded the floor of the basin on the fountain in Piazza Navona into a kind of domical shape. And we were absolutely thrilled to discover that this same rounding was discovered by the curators in the model itself, and which a detail of which we're looking at here. This is the rise that we're talking about, a subtle rise planned from the beginning right here in the model, and which was executed. It is incorporated in the fountain that we know today. We knew that from the restorations that have recently been taking place on that fountain. well before we discovered this corroboration of our thoughts. Our documents also reveal that Virgilio Spada, the papal bursar and building expert, was extremely impressed by Bernini's restoration of the obelisk, and the modern restoration of 2006 to 2010 begins to tell us why. Photos show that while Bernini had to attach older pieces of granite, new pieces in the spire had also to be carved and inserted. And I'm talking about a piece like this that had to be newly carved and newly inserted. I'm also talking about a piece like this or like this. Dovetailed inserts join two pieces of granite in a number of different places. You can see one here, and you can see another there. And you can see how Bernini has disguised their presence by incising the design to either side right over these elements. The lion's back becomes a part of the dovetail right here. The lion extends right over the dovetail. It's even more pronounced and more linear in this case here. Sometimes Bernini had the inserts hammered to create a texture that mimicked the granite. Occasionally, he inserted metal ties, which you can see here. He frequently filled cracks, and he then painted the fill, and you can see residue of paint here and here. He also gave crisp edges to the granite. And here you see an addition that does that, although some of those edges have eroded over time, and you can sort of see right behind them, right through them. And in one instance, he attempted to highlight a hieroglyph with a metal attachment, the holes for which still exist, so that the Egyptian bird could be likened to the Pamphili dove. Considering the amount of piecing and repair going on here, it's easy to sympathize with those critics who thought that the obelisk would never be stable when erected, and yet they were wrong. In fact, there's so many breaks in the stone that are so carefully joined or filled that we fail to notice them. And no one does, at least in the literature, after Virgilio Spada. He alone fully recognized these subtleties, which explains why he later consoled Borromini for losing the Four Rivers commission to his rival, saying the work was anyway better suited for a sculptor than an architect. To this end, we can add another crucial consideration, which was the method for hoisting the Pamphili spire into place. Here again, Spada wrote glowingly about the novel method Bernini invented to assemble and erect the pieces. The system relied on just two principal timbers, these two here and here, rather than the usual 4 or 8, and a very minimal amount of timbering at the bottom versus the more usual means for raising an obelisk in this epoch. Spada reserves special praise for the artist's ability to pull off the operation in a single day, quote, to the wonder of everyone present, including the naysayers, end quote. This information led Maria Grazia and I to identify drawings of the hoisting apparatus in Copenhagen and Stockholm, and I'm showing you the Copenhagen version here on the right. which corresponds exactly to Spada's detailed description. These drawings were probably made by Nicodemus Tessin in Rome around 1675. Our work also emphasizes the obvious blurring of tectonics in the way water spurts from tubular and flattened jets from the corners of the fountain, producing both wide blades of liquid and heavier linear cascades. Water covers or crashes over the rocks, feeding the pools, dissolving travertine archipelagos, and agitating the surface of an emblematic ocean. Out of these choppy seas emerges a rugged base that symbolizes the continents. It was apt for us then to find that the curators had identified a layer of the wood in the Bologna model that corresponds to a layer in the fountain itself, below which there is no flora, there is no fauna. The carving simply stops. Model and monument. This kind of consistency between preparatory detail and finished work of art is really rare, in my experience at least, but it highlights Bernini's extraordinary control over his design. To elaborate, in the past, historians have wondered why some of the flora on the model, for example, was applied in red wax while other flora was carved into the wood itself, as Tony's photographs show. The purpose of this distinction was to specify the responsibilities of the stonemasons versus the sculptors, the Scarpellini versus the Scultori. Here, the payment documents reveal one of the widely overlooked novelties of the enterprise, which is the huge responsibility of the travertine stonecutters under Fracchi for carving the palm tree to the west, the cactus facing the east, the peonies, and the various other flowers and plants, all specified by name and genus, the armadillo, the so-called dragon, a fish, an eel, the horse, the lion, of course, and all the many plants next to them. The payments record the great difficulty, difficoltà grandissima, in executing these parts, often at uncomfortable angle, in sito scomodo, with extraordinary effort, fatica estrema, yet also with the diligence and expenditure of time that justified the very large payments that were being requested. The team had to carve with naturalistic precision, and to do so over the corbel layers of the travertine, whose porous but brittle texture is notorious for catching a chisel and devastating the effect. In other words, any piece here that moves across the layers has to work very, very tightly, or the effect is lost. We can see some of this in the way, for example, the mane of the horse has been carried onto the rock next to it, or the way that the lion, who is actually attached to his cave by the growth here, as he brushes past, has been handled. Maybe the best example is the one that shows Sale's arms, which we have a model for here. That is a piece of marble that has to be installed in, as you can see, in the travertine. A tremendous amount of precision is necessary for that to be handled correctly and properly and convincingly. Among the most compelling examples of the stonecutter's brilliance is, of course, the snake. 20 palms long, coiling over the west side of the base, apparently independent of the rock, but actually carved from it, carved from the matrix of the rock. In a sense, it was a pièce de résistance of Fracchi's team, a virtuoso performance that, like all other aspects of the fountain, was anticipated by its creator. These circumstances explain the cost of Fracchi's work and why it amounted to 1/3 of the cost of the entire enterprise, which separately required conduits delivered to deliver the water, the costs of transporting repairing, hoisting the ancient obelisks, etc. Regarding the Moore fountain, we have very little to add to the exemplary catalog account. Bernini's first design in the form of a shell raised by 3 fish, but called the Fountain of the Snail, is recorded on the Windsor drawing in the exhibition. It was rejected, and a second design incorporating tritons and dolphins is also recorded in a drawing and relates to a surviving clay model from Berlin. When the second scheme for the South Fountain, the one involving tritons and dolphins, was rejected, the curators posit that Bernini had to produce a knockout blow, a model now, again, so attractive and finished that Innocent X and Olympia could do no more than approve it heartily. This convincingly explains, for them and certainly for me, the exceptional size, quality, and the unblemished aspect of the figure for the fountain of the so-called Moor at the Kimbell Museum. Once again, the execution of the fountain was entrusted to an assistant, Giovanni Antonio Mari, and realized between 1653 and 55. Once again, the base is hewn out of quarried pieces, joined to support a marble figure. I like the context that the organizers have created for this model because it helps us to address Bernini's extensive use of assistants on Piazza Navona. Why did he farm out such a conspicuous and initially problematic commission as this to an assistant? Why did Bernini do this with a Four Rivers fountain? One answer might be that Bernini was too busy with other work to do the carving himself. Another may relate to the increasing size and capacity of studios, of his studio or studios in this era. Whatever the case, the success of the Four Rivers fountain after its unveiling in 1651 engendered the second commission. Perhaps what counted most in both cases was the idea, the concetto. Pictures of the Moor, these taken before its restoration. From the distance of the Pamphili Palace, it would have been impossible to discern the hand of Bernini on individual components, yet the full effect of his fountains would have been poignantly registered. Assuming the presence of an autograph model there, or models in this particular case, two-hand in the palace, a patron could boast of the achievements realized on the piazza and admire the subtle touch of the artist. It was an economy that in no way compromised the result, and history tells us that it worked. Thank you.